Week-long break to a widening controversy over SNC-Lavalin and alleged government interference. The opposition is demanding answers after Justin Trudeau's key advisor resigned yesterday. Gerald Butts explicitly denies allegations that he or anyone in the Prime Minister's office pressured Jody Wilson-Raybould to help SNC-Lavalin avoid criminal charges. But he says he's leaving because he doesn't want to, quote, distract from the government's vital work. Now, opposition parties are calling for a public inquiry into the whole affair. Welcome to our viewers on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and of course on CBC News Network. A lot has already happened this morning, including cabinet meeting just breaking. But we want to, and apparently Jody Wilson-Raybould has emerged. We don't know from that meeting or from an area near the Prime Minister's office. We're going to try and turn around that tape for you as soon as possible. But here's a quick recap of the day so far.
Gerald Butts, who was the architect of the Sunny Ways revolution that propelled our present Prime Minister into the office that he has, was forced to resign in disgrace. That shows us that the crisis, the corrosive nature of this scandal is eating away right into the office of the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister must come clean with Canadians today.
I am proud to stand with my colleagues to support this motion, urging the Prime Minister to waive privilege in this case. Canadians are tired of him speaking for the former Attorney General. It's time that Canadians heard from her herself.
It's obviously a sad moment for me and Jerry's many friends and people who really admire the tremendous work he's done for Canada. Having said that, our work goes on, as Jerry said in his own letter.
I'm here now with the host of CBC Radio's The House, Chris Hall. We're going to discuss the implications of all of this, but I have received word that we do have the tape turnaround of Jody Wilson-Raybould exiting that cabinet area and talking to reporters for about a minute. Let's play that now, and we'll talk about it right after.
Do you have any indication if you can speak? Are you counting on speaking? No, I
That's it for Caleb?
Sorry.
Are layered and incredibly complicated, so I'm still working with my lawyer.
Were you pressured by the Prime Minister's office? Were you pressured by the Prime Minister's office?
Still working with my lawyer.
How long
Why did you resign?
to get a decision? Are you still a member of the caucus, though? The Liberal caucus, Ms. Wilson?
Do you plan to stay in caucus, Ms. Wilson-Raybould?
I am a Liberal member of Parliament, thank you.
Are you going to run as a Liberal next election? Were you in the cabinet meeting, Madam Wilson?
Okay, so a few interesting things. I apologize. Some of the audio on that was very difficult to hear, but one thing was very clear at the end there. She was asked, Chris, host of the House, Chris Hall here, she was asked whether or not she's still a Liberal member of cabinet, and she said she is.
Two takeaways. One is that
caucus.
Yes, she considers herself still a Liberal MP and a member of caucus and has work to do, she said, for her constituents. Caucus meets tomorrow for the first time since this whole affair broke. My guess is, having talked to some Liberal MPs, that there will be a lot of concern about this issue, and her own presence there will be, I think, controversial, judged on what I've heard today, that people aren't sure what to make of the leaks, the allegations, and they would like to hear from both the Prime Minister and potentially from her about what there is to say. And as a result, we already know from her just comments there that she is still working with her lawyer, who, by the way, is former Supreme Court Justice Thomas Cromwell, about what she can say without violating solicitor-client privilege. And just to remind people, as Attorney General, she is the sort of the lawyer to the cabinet and particularly to the Prime Minister. She can't waive solicitor-client privilege. The Prime Minister, as the client, has that option, but so far he has said he can't exercise that till he too has legal advice about what the unintended consequences of that might be.
And the other part that we could hear very clearly there was our colleague Katie Simpson asking very directly the exact allegation that's contained in the Globe and Mail, which is, were you pressured by someone in the Prime Minister's office? And she again referred to the fact that she's consulting a lawyer.
That's right. And, you know, and this is really interesting. We've talked about this over the last several days about what's her end game. We know she has kept her counsel to herself in terms of what she has to say about the allegations. We know the Prime Minister's own story over the last several days has changed in small ways. We still don't know, in particular, about that meeting in September where she asked him directly, are you directing me to take action on the prosecution? And he said, no, it's your decision to make about whether SNC-Lavalin is allowed to avail itself of this deferred prosecution agreement, which means paying a fine as opposed to going to trial. Still lots of questions unanswered, despite Gerry Butts' continued denial of any allegations that he tried to pressure anyone else did.
Fascinating also that in the middle of cabinet, and I'm unclear, and we'll try to get this clear as soon as possible, but she emerged from the area that looked like cabinet. Apparently we're told she might be meeting on the sidelines, but cabinet was just broke. Right. Basically now had been meeting all morning. Fascinating that she would be there. Yeah,
I don't know is the answer. Whether she was in cabinet, that would be a huge surprise, I'm sure, to all involved. But she did come out of the area, and just to remind people, this is now the West Block as the Center Block is closed. So some of the confines aren't as familiar. Hallways and passageways are not necessarily the same as they used to be. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that she was in the same area and came out just about the same time as cabinet itself broke.
How, from the people you're speaking with, how is the news of Mr. Butts' resignation resonating right now within caucus, within cabinet?
Well, I think most people felt that two things. The first is that if she is going to speak, they assume that she will, that gives him the opportunity to defend himself and his reputation. If there was an allegation he somehow tried to pressure her or someone under his leadership tried to pressure her into intervening in the prosecution. Secondly, it strips away the veneer that the Prime Minister's office is now still involved in directing him in how he responds to the allegations. I read from that, and several people obviously have told us at CBC that they believe that he will answer pretty firmly and vigorously if she does suggest that he in some way acted in a way that was either illegal or improper. So it really is, we're all waiting for the next shoe to drop, and that is when she speaks and how Gerry Butts and the government will respond.
We are also waiting, and I again want to welcome all our viewers on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. We're also waiting for question period. We'll of course bring you that live in a few minutes, but here to watch it live with us and analyze all the day's events, we're joined by an early version of the Power Panel. In Toronto, Tiffany Gooch of Enterprise Canada, and with me in studio, Tim Powers of Summa Strategies and former NDP MP, now political commentator, Françoise Boivin. Of course, Chris Hall with the host here. Hi, everyone, again. Françoise, welcome back from Florida, first of all. You came back in a very interesting week.
Yeah, I insisted on coming back.
So what do you make of Ms. Wilson-Raybould's presence? We heard just a few words from her, but some pretty significant ones considering how long we've been waiting to hear anything.
I'm still a bit in awe that it's taking so long to get the legal advice from ex-Justice, Supreme Court Justice, because the question, in my opinion, is quite simple. She either has the protection, like it was not waived. It's either waived or not waived. So the question that would be asked of her lawyer is there an implicit waiver to that protection between lawyer and client, that privilege. And you have to listen to what has been said, read what has been declared, and so on and so forth. So it's either one or the other. So I think there's more to it than just the legal aspect of it. I think there's all the political surrounding surrounding that event. Like Chris said, she did say that she was still a member of Parliament, a Liberal member of Parliament. She's a member of that caucus. She's still not taking very well the demotion, so there's a lot of things at stake into this, and we'll see.
Tim, what did you make of the fact that she remains a Liberal MP? She was very unequivocal in the elevator there. There had been a lot of speculation if all the things she had written in her resignation letter apply to cabinet and the way cabinet functions, do they apply to caucus? Apparently not.
Well, maybe she's also daring the government to kick her out, which would be a very difficult thing for them to do right now. Exactly. It would be almost an untenable thing to do. So I think she's figuring out what her next steps are. But two really fascinating things from today. One, you played the clip of the Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, talking glowingly about Gerry Butts, and many staff who leave would love to have a Foreign Affairs Minister talk glowingly about them. you have to wonder, so that's point one, if ministers speaking so well about Gerald Butts and what he did for the government doesn't actually create more of a problem for the government, because it reinforces the narrative that he was an indispensable part of all that happened in the government. And he was, but you want to step away from that. The second element to all of this, that somehow Jerry is now going to be unshackled. Well, I know Jerry, and I know his use of Twitter. He was never really shackled. Never. And the element now that he's going to come out and fight, which he has a right to do, and to be fair, he has said quite emphatically he didn't do anything wrong. But Jerry, of all people, will know if he engages in a battle between himself, Jody Wilson-Raybould, and whatever her version of a story is, if we ever hear it, how helpful is that going to be the government that he's not trying to be a distraction for? It just seems really odd.
Tiffany, as I mentioned, we heard a little bit from Jody Wilson-Raybould. Are you, like Francoise, curious about what's taking so long in the consultations, both for her and the Prime Minister, where the question of privilege, is concerned?
No, I think it makes complete sense that she's taking her time and is navigating this as a very complex situation and doing it for the first time. And I think that it's really important for us to remember and keep in mind the difficulties and all of the strains that sit within and for minority leaders. And she was a first, and her legacy and everything that she does from this point forward will be scrutinized in a very a different way than most. And I think that she's treading very carefully, because she has to tread carefully, because everything that she does in these next few days, every word that she says in passing and everything that she puts in writing is going to be scrutinized. And I think that she's navigating all of those complex expectations from different audiences. Of course, she's got relationships on the Hill. It makes complete sense that she would be as close as possible to those people and those who came out early and publicly in full support of her. And as more details come out and more of this story comes out, I understand her wanting to shape her own narrative and figure out exactly how to ensure that she's protected in this process.
Two things. I from the government standpoint...
Well, the Prime Minister's coming in. Sorry, I'll just cut to it. I don't think he's saying anything, but we'll listen in. No, he's just walking right by. Never mind.
Two things. One, if you're the government, you want her to speak sooner rather than later, one would think, because the longer this issue drags out, the more difficult it becomes to change the narrative away from the scandal, if that's what it is, and back to the government's agenda. That's the first thing. To Tim's point about why what Gerald Butts might be able to say on the outside, I think it is about his reputation. That's the important part of all of this. And I didn't take the distraction part as seriously, because that's really what every politician says when they resign from something. I think what he's trying to do, though, is make it clear that he is prepared to defend himself vigorously, depending on what she has to say.
Here's the Prime Minister again. Sorry, let's listen in.
Madame Wilson-Raybould a demandé de venir parler au cabinet et on l'a invité de venir. Mais évidemment, ce qui est discuté au cabinet demeure une confidence.
Wow.
Okay, so what I understood that, and your French is a lot better than mine, but that she asked to speak with cabinet.
She's the one who asked to meet with the cabinet members, and they said yes, and he will not discuss what has been said, because cabinet discussions are not for the general public. So she's the one who asked.
So this is fascinating. I think all of our jaws kind of dropped when we heard that. Chris, what do you? I don't know what to say.
I don't know what she was telling them. I don't know why she would ask to meet them. If she is constrained in a certain way from speaking publicly, she's not constrained in the same way of discussing it with cabinet. Gerald Butts has resigned. She has an opportunity now to explain what she means. But if there is an allegation of interference in a criminal prosecution, you can't keep that behind closed doors. It has to be made publicly at some point. So, I don't want to go too far down this road, but what she tells cabinet is important if there is, in fact, some truth to the story that she feels that she was pressured to intervene in a criminal prosecution of a very high-profile firm like SNC-Lavalin.
Also fascinating that she would be the one
that asked for
that asked, according to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, according to what the Prime Minister said. Now, I like Chris, I can't think of any time where this has happened before. There have been certainly cabinet fights and ministers have left. This is obviously a very high-profile one. Who knows what the strategy is for Ms. Wilson-Raybould and what the government's wisdom was in accepting it. That may be problematic for them on a go-forward basis. I just want to go back to something, though, that was mentioned earlier. if there's nothing to this story, is the government trying to set this up now as Miss Wilson-Raybould, and I heard a little bit of this whispered in back channel yesterday, was trying to extract some revenge about her demotion? That's a dangerous path to go down on. We've already seen the backlash that came when there were private voices whispering publicly that somehow she was at fault and she was difficult to deal with. This story has no comparator that I can think of, Vashi. So trying to find one is the eternal search.
You were surprised when you heard the Prime Minister just now, Françoise?
Yes, I am, and I doubt. Absolutely, I don't doubt that it's Ms. Wilson-Raybould who asked to meet cabinet. I just can't see any reason why the cabinet members would, in the circumstances of the day after Mr. Butt leaves, ask her to come and join them. So definitely, she probably approached them. Put that in combination with the fact that she says she's still a Liberal member of Parliament. She still believes in the party. And maybe she wanted to clean the air with the other members without any filters. Because I've been in not the Liberal cabinet, but I've been in the Liberal caucus in another time of crisis, during the Gomery public inquiry. We were faced with different, numerous anonymous source and so on and so forth. And there were people sometimes sitting right beside you, and you knew they were the ones talking to the media. So she wants to be able to probably go to caucus tomorrow. She still has a political career to kind of, and she's got her supporters. I used to be chair of the Women Caucus, and it's a strong caucus. We might not hear a lot publicly, but they tend to stick together. We saw it with one minister saying, "I enjoyed and I really appreciated," I forget her name, but who worked with Jody Wilson-Raybould. There's a lot of other women. There's senators. There's all the First Nations, Indigenous caucus that are probably surrounding her also. So she might have tried to just get a bit of support.
Tiffany, what do you read into her appearance before cabinet?
Yeah, I think she's trying to take control of her narrative. I don't know that anybody wants to, and any cabinet members especially, want to be hearing these details.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're going to head right into question period. The questions are about to start. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister's principal secretary resigned. And we know that it's because of the bribery and corruption scandal that's touched the Prime Minister's office. Now, if the principal secretary is innocent, why did the Prime Minister accept his resignation? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, I accepted Gerald Butts' resignation, and I have to say he served our country with integrity and sage advice, and I thank him for his service and his continued friendship. Mr. Butts has always put respect for our institutions as his very highest priority, and that's why he took the decision to resign, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Why did Mr. Butts resign?
Yeah.
The Prime Minister's story on this has changed multiple times since the scandal was first brought to light. And now we find out that the key strategist in the Liberal Prime Minister's office, the architect of the Liberal government policy, has resigned. But in so doing, he is pretending that he has done nothing wrong. So if the Prime Minister is so sure that these allegations are false, and if Mr. Butts did nothing wrong, then why did the Prime Minister accept his resignation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Gerald Butts has always believed in the confidence that Canadians must have in our institutions, and indeed believe deeply in the work that this government needs to continue to do to deliver for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. That is why he made the decision to step down, to step away, because the work that this government is doing, and indeed the confidence that Canadians must have in their institutions and the processes we have, comes before all else.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are losing confidence in this government because every single day the story changes. So now the explanation is that Gerald Butts was so good at his job that he just had to resign in scandal. But it's a continuation of a theme we've seen for days now. First, he tried to blame the former Attorney General. Then he tried to blame Scott Bryson. All the while, he was directing Liberals on the Justice Committee to block attempts at inviting key officials to testify. Do these sound like the actions of a man who has nothing to hide?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
This government has always and will always stand up for the institutions and the principles that underlie the strength of our democracy. We are unequivocal about that. That's why whether it's respecting the independence of members of parliamentary committees or making sure that we are allowing for the full scope of judicial independence, we will always defend the systems and the institutions that keep Canada safe and prosperous as a democracy.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when these allegations were first raised, the Prime Minister tried to dismiss them as being completely false. His story then changed multiple times. He's blamed several individuals, and now his principal advisor has quit. But there is one person who could clear up a lot of the issues around this situation, and that's the one person that the Prime Minister won't allow to speak. He continually speaks for the Attorney General, but I believe Canadians would like to hear from her herself. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing and waive the attorney-client privilege that he claims to have and let the former Attorney General speak?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with everything this government has done, domestically, internationally, internally, we always consistently stand up for the rule of law, for the independence of our judiciary. We will continue to do that and continue to do the right thing. In the matter of solicitor-client privilege, the member opposite must know that there are real dangers of unintended consequences, particularly on the two court cases currently wending their way through the courts. That is why I have asked our Attorney General to give me advice on the very important matter.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I think the unintended consequences he's worried about is losing more key staff from the Prime Minister's office as the truth comes out on this. So it's clear that we're just going to get the rehashed talking points and the Prime Minister's rhetoric, trying to convince Canadians that there's nothing to see here. So I'll ask him a very specific question, and this is one that should be easy for him to answer. The Budget Implementation Act became law on June 21st, 2018, which means that's when deferred prosecution agreements became possible. Can the Prime Minister tell this House how many times since June 21st of last year did Gerald Butts meet with the former Attorney General?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our Cabinet gets together every Tuesday to talk about a broad range of issues. We continue to meet regularly as MPs, as caucus members. Members in my office are engaged constantly with various departments and with ministers to stand up for Canadian jobs, to make sure we're moving forward in the right way, to make sure we're standing up for the institutions and principles that underpin our democracy. We will always work hard to make sure we're delivering properly for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Les Basques. Mr. Speaker, last week, the Minister of Economic Development and the Minister of Public Services and Procurement declared on television that it's important that we have the version of the former Minister of Justice. We agree. This is why we were disappointed when Liberal members of the Justice Committee refused to invite and keep refusing to invite Gerald Butts. It's clear that the member for Vancouver-Granville wants to give her version of the story. The Prime Minister has given us 5 versions so far. Will he allow the former Minister of Justice to speak by waiving privilege? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are getting advice on the solicitor-client privilege. We want to act in respect of all laws and rules. The Honourable Member. All the Prime Minister has to do is to allow her to speak, to waive privilege. He refuses to do so. The Justice Committee is refusing to do its work and investigate these serious allegations of political obstruction. Canadians want the truth. They want transparency.
Be free from even the perception of political interference and uphold the highest levels of public confidence.
That was the former Minister of Justice. That was her speaking. If he won't waive privilege, will he call for an independent inquiry? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have entire confidence in the Ethics Commissioner. We trust him to do his work. We support him in this work, and we will welcome anything he has to say with great openness. The member across the way should know that members of the Justice Committee decide on what they will do. They are masters of their committee.
Member for Timmins James Bay.
So Gerald Butts, the architect of Sunny Ways, has been packing under a storm of corruption. So it's up to this Prime Minister to come clean over allegations that his office attempted to strong-arm the Attorney General into taking a fall in one of the biggest corruption cases in memory. Now, this Prime Minister promised to do things differently, but the SNC scandal is corroding his credibility, so he needs to stop hiding. Will he waive solicitor-client privilege, and will he agree to an independent inquiry to restore the confidence of the Canadian people in him as Prime Minister?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have an Ethics and Conflict of Interest Commissioner to determine the reality in issues just like this. He is pursuing his investigation, and as I said from the very first day, we welcome that work. In the matter of solicitor-client privilege, it's obviously a matter we have to consider very carefully. There is a real risk of unintended consequences, particularly on the two court cases currently underway right now. But I have asked our Attorney General for advice on this matter.
Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
I'm listening really hard, but for a Prime Minister who claims to be innocent, my God, he's sounding guilty. Because the client here is the Prime Minister, and the question is whether he tried to strong-arm his former Attorney General and then had her fired because she wouldn't take a fall in one of the biggest corruption cases. So stop hiding behind the legal games. Let her speak. Enough with this, he said. And then he said something different. And when that didn't work, he said something else about what she was supposed to say. Just let her speak. Do the right.
I remind the Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay of the rule, of course, that he's familiar with, that one must direct one's comments to the Chair. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the member opposite who's speaking disparagingly about laws and legal issues, we continue to respect our system of justice. We respect the independence of the judiciary. We will always do our work that way. That is why we welcome the news that the Ethics Commissioner is going to be looking into this matter, and we will fully cooperate with them. That is something that Canadians expect as we uphold the highest standards of their faith in our institutions.
Member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, what Canadians are asking very clearly and very simply is, why do we have to continuously hear the story from the Prime Minister's point of view as opposed to hearing it from the former Attorney General's point of view? Now, I know one could possibly say as an excuse that sometimes we perceive situations differently depending upon what gender we are, but this is the rule of law. And, Mr. Speaker, what Canadians want to hear specifically is, what does the former Attorney General have to say? Will the Prime Minister waive his solicitor-client privilege?
Honourable Prime Minister, the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the Prime Minister has asked me for a legal opinion on the question of solicitor-client privilege. I am studying that. I'm studying that issue, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. I'm having trouble hearing the Honourable Minister of Justice. I know members want to hear both the question and the answer, so we'll have a little order. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, to continue, I am studying the issue and will provide my legal opinion in due course. It would be inappropriate for me, Mr. Speaker, to say anything more.
The member for Milton. Order.
Speaker, this Attorney General has already said many things about what he believes. The former Attorney General believes, thinks, or even did. So therefore, it should take him very simply not much time to determine whether or not she can go ahead and speak. But now that I have him on his feet, Mr. Speaker, I'm very curious. Last week, in a newspaper report, this Attorney General indicated that the matter regarding deferred remediation agreements and SNC-Lavalin was very much still alive and sitting on his desk. I'd like to ask the member, conveniently from Montreal, whether or not he has made a decision on the SNC-Lavalin issue.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I stated in that interview the law of Canada as it was passed and as is still the case, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment further.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Order, please. Mr. Speaker, last week we had the resignation of the former Minister of Justice. Yesterday, the resignation of the Prime Minister's Principal Secretary, who's also his best friend. And this following serious allegations of pressure by the PMO on the former Attorney General. And this in a matter of bribery and fraud. Canadians want the truth. Only one person can give it to us. Why will the Prime Minister not waive privilege? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Or rather, the Minister. The Minister, former Minister, shared a letter with all Canadians. All members are here. All of us here are here to work hard for Canadians. That's my priority. It's priority of this government and members on our side. We're working for Canadians. That is what we've been doing. That is what we will continue to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, every day since the revelations of the Globe and Mail, the Prime Minister has been giving us a new version.
We are listening into Question Period live here in Ottawa. I'm Vashi Kapelis. You're watching a special early edition of Power and Politics. We're on CBC News Network, but we're also streaming live on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm here with the Power panel, Tiffany Gooch, Tim Powers, Françoise Boivin, and Chris Hall. We want to get to a lot of your questions. I know a lot of them have been coming in, but I just want to sort of set up what's happened in the last half an hour because it has been very significant. We saw Cabinet, which met this morning, breaking, and out of Cabinet comes Jody Wilson-Raybould, of course, the former Justice Minister, at the heart of the controversy that has been enveloping Ottawa for the past 10 days. She spoke with reporters. I want to play you exactly what she said. We have better audio this time, so take a listen.
Ms. Wilson-Raybould, what do you have to say? Can you speak?
No, I am still consulting with my legal counsel, as I think people can appreciate or should appreciate the rules and laws around privilege, around confidentiality, around my responsibility as a member of Parliament. My ethical and professional responsibilities as a lawyer are layered and incredibly complicated, so I'm still working with my lawyer.
Were you pressured by the Prime Minister's office? Were you pressured by the Prime Minister's office?
Still working with my lawyer.
Why did you resign? Why did you resign? Are you still a member of the caucus, though, the Liberal caucus, Ms. Wilson?
Do you plan to stay in caucus, Ms. Wilson-Raybould?
I am a Liberal member of Parliament, thank you.
Are you going to run as a Liberal next election? Were you in the cabinet meeting, Madam Wilson?
So a few minutes later, the Prime Minister emerged, and on his way into Question Period, he also spoke to reporters, and he said in French that former Minister Raybould had asked to come to Cabinet and address Cabinet. We don't know about what, but that was her request to go there. Then we head into Question Period, and Jody Wilson-Raybould is sitting in the front row on the Liberal side. She said there at the end, of course, she remains a Liberal MP, sitting next to Minister Sajjan, the Defence Minister, who has taken over her duties in the portfolio of Veterans Affairs on an interim basis, and sitting next to Kent Hare, who's also a former minister. A few minutes after that, Ikra Khalid, who is a Liberal MP who sits on the Justice Committee, which is right now today going to be debating who to call before it as they look into this issue. She tweeted out, "I have given notice of motion at the Justice Committee to invite the Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould to appear before the committee." So that's basically what's happened in the last half hour. Tiffany, I'll start with you because I cut you off before we went into Question Period. How do you read this? It feels to me like something is up.
Well, it feels to me, and we were talking about this a little bit before we went into Question Period, and I think it's been important for Wilson-Raybould to be able to build her own narrative, and that is to many different audiences. So one is the public, and that narrative she hasn't been able to articulate yet, and we'll see, and she's continuing to work with her lawyer. But I think the others that are very important as audiences for her are the rest of caucus, is Cabinet, and so for her to go out today and put herself forward to ensure that what they were hearing from her directly, if that was different from what they were hearing in media reports, that she was able to build that rapport that she's likely had to build over time with them as cabinet colleagues over the years. And I think further to that now, to that work that she's likely doing with caucus, and then to go ahead and say and make herself available should that be what is the next step with the Justice Committee. And I think people are waiting and would like to hear from her. And she's treading very carefully about how and to whom and how she speaks, but have full confidence that whatever she has to say we'll be hearing in these coming days.
It's, yeah, I suspect the government is viewing this, look, if we don't, we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. If we don't call her now, she can decide what she says there, and assumedly, unless she has a decision rendered from her attorney on what can be said with solicitor-client privilege, she's probably going to say, I can't say anything to this juncture, so they can say, look, we called her. The real interesting person to call would now be citizen Gerald Butts, who cannot be restrained or prevented from going in there. He's a free citizen. He can decide what to do. But you know what's really fascinating here is what's killing the government, at least in the story arc, who knows what will happen politically, is they continue not to be able to allow people to speak. Even after Jody Wilson-Raybould went into that cabinet gathering, whatever it may have been, the Prime Minister's answer was, yes, she wanted to speak to us, but I can't say anything about it. If I'm managing this story, well, I may get some symbolic value out of her being heard. It's no value if I can't tell the audience what she's speaking about. They can begin to unpack this story and have it potentially go in a different direction if Jody Wilson-Raybould can speak, which they control, or there's some ability to share part of what happened in cabinet.
Can I add to that? It's interesting to me. She speaks to cabinet where she is not fettered by solicitor-client privilege. Right. They would be a mail. She speaks to caucus tomorrow, potentially. What can she tell them? That is also held behind closed doors, but more likely than not will end up as members of the media hearing from various MPs who are in about what she had to say. And then she appears before the committee. She has different parts of the story, different freedoms to say different things depending on who she's appearing before. I don't, to follow what Francois said before the break, I understand why she might have wanted an opportunity to explain to Cabinet what has transpired. I'm not sure why Cabinet would allow her to do that, because it then raises a whole question like, what is she telling them in Cabinet that she's no longer prepared to, or not yet ready to tell the public?
And it looks like she's controlling the agenda.
Well, apparently, according to the Prime Minister's office, she requested the meeting this morning, and they agreed to. So at post Gerald Butts' resignation, and they agreed to hear from her. Françoise, what are you reading?
Well, I'm reading so many things. It's incredible how it goes in my head right now, because let's face it, we've been for years, and if not decades, complaining about how PMO, everything is concentrated in PMO, be it conservatives or liberals. That hasn't changed because it's the sunny ways of Justin Trudeau. There might be some people who thought that it would change. I'm reading bits, I've got like remnants of things that Jody Wilson-Raybould wrote. First, when she passed from Minister of Justice to the job as Minister of Veterans Affairs. Then her letter when she stepped down from cabinet. And she says things that, without saying much, says a lot. And who are such innuendo, you don't exactly know what does she mean. From this, we are all extrapolating that there was some type of pressure. There's an article in the Globe and Mail. There's sources. I can't say that the Globe and Mail created the piece, so I have to believe that they have sources, or they wouldn't have gone into an article with it. And since then, it's all great. You've got the government, the Prime Minister saying, we have not pressured. If it is the case, it's very easy for Jody Wilson-Raybould just to say, like my client, I confirm what my client is saying. When I represent a client and my client is saying something and I go publicly, I say like my client. If I don't agree with them, I'll go back in the room and say, listen, is there a problem with our message? Because that's not what I understood. You've got the Prime Minister who said at some point in time, did she understood something different? Did she take it as pressure, the fact that somebody from PMO, which they do in everything, in everything. I remember receiving calls as an MP from somebody from the office of the Prime Minister at the time saying, make sure that when you talk about this with the media, and I'm like, you're not my boss, and hang up. But it's been done forever. So
we don't know. The thing is, we don't know what the pressure.
But the problem with
means.
Jody Wilson-Raybould probably is that she probably feel that she got sanctioned by going from Justice to Veterans Affairs. I know all the veterans are saying, hey, it's not an insult to become Minister of Veterans Affairs, but when you're the Minister of Justice, it's quite something. I mean, you're number 2, number 3 of the cabinet, so of course you would take it that way. Was there no enough explanation? I think they have a lot of dirty laundry too, but it's taking proportion that I blame the Prime Minister for not putting his foot down and saying, there's a misunderstanding, there's nothing illegal, otherwise all our imagination is just running rampant.
I have to head to break in a second, but I want to take one question because we do have a lot of them coming in. Chris, I'll throw it at you. Carol Baker asks on Facebook, is there any real concrete proof of any wrongdoing thus far, or is this all still accusations and political grandstanding?
There's been nothing actually beyond the Globe and Mail's initial story about the allegations. We don't know who made the allegations. We don't know the precise nature of the allegation, i.e. what does pressure really mean. So no, there's nothing in terms of solid evidence that anything has transpired beyond what has been alleged in a newspaper story from unnamed sources.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We're putting the power panel on pause for a couple minutes. But again, if you are watching us on social media, we will continue the conversation during the commercial break. Stay with us. We're back with the power panel during our TV commercial break, but still online. Tiffany, I wanted to check in again about Ikra Khalid's tweet, because last week in the Justice Committee, she was, I don't know the nature of the motion she's going to introduce, but the opposition MPs were, very much, the Liberal MPs did not want to commit to calling, there's their tweet right there up, I've given notice of motion at the Justice Committee to invite Jody Wilson-Raybould to appear. They did not want to commit to that last week. What could have changed?
Well, I think over the last week, a lot has changed, and I think in that first portion, it was protecting and understanding what the role of the Justice Committee was, and that was a lot of the conversation. It was ensuring that it didn't become a sort of a place to air everything if that wasn't a place necessarily that this could be resolved. And I think everyone was sort of pushing it to ensure that the Ethics Commissioner and whatever investigation might come through there was likely where everything should be focused rather than Justice Committee. So I think at this point, if I would actually make the assumption, if possible, that this was something that Wilson-Raybould might be agreeable to, and I think in the beginning that they were unwilling to sort of go down that road if it was going to add further fire to the issue. But I guess over this last week, fire has been thrown.
Could it also mean, Tim, that the Liberals are not afraid of what she might say before the committee?
And I think that's, I know you said that to Tim, but I'll also add in, and I think that's something I've taken away from this. It's that Cabinet allowing her to speak and not sort of blocking that being something that came up the morning of the meeting, it being an emergency meeting and one where the Prime Minister had a really big job to do in terms of helping everyone understand the situation and their way forward. Letting her sort of have that as a platform, and these next ones, I think does give an idea that there isn't fear necessarily of what she has to say here.
I just have a few seconds.
Yeah, no, certainly they could be, but why did it take them so long? If they had nothing to worry about, why didn't they do it last week?
Well, and why has Gerald Butts resigned?
Yes, exactly. A lot of whys, not a lot of
We're forgetting
what
about
fors.
Gerry.
Not forgetting. Yeah, quickly, Chris.
I'm not sure I accept that explanation. It would have come out before, and we wouldn't have Gerald Butts having to deny the allegation, step aside in order to defend his reputation. There has to be more coming.
And it will depend on how many meetings they allocate for the matter, because if they have like 2 or 3 or 4, and ex-Minister Raybould Wilson said, I will have my legal advice in a month, they can go through and she'll come in and say, so they'll have invited them.
I got to cut you off. Sorry, we got to go to black, and we'll be back up on the TV in a second. Welcome back to Power and Politics, the early edition. I'm Vashi Capellos here with the Power panel, Chris Hall, Françoise Boivin, Tim Powers, and Tiffany Gooch. We are live streaming on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and of course, broadcasting live on CBC News Network. Here, willing and ready to take your questions, so keep them coming in. Chris, in the break, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we were discussing. The Iqra Khalid's tweet saying that she's going to introduce a motion. There it is up there. I've given notice of motion at the Justice Committee to invite Jody Wilson-Raybould to appear before the committee, and I asked the question whether this would indicate that perhaps the Liberals aren't afraid of what she will say.
Well, and then the obvious question becomes, why did Gerald Butts feel compelled to deny the allegations and to resign and say more specifically, I need to defend my reputation and that's my responsibility alone? So we don't know how many meetings there were, and I think I raised this with you yesterday on the show. We don't know if he was present at the meeting where in September the Prime Minister was talking to Jody Wilson-Raybould about all the various pressure that was going on around the SNC-Lavalin prosecution, and she asked him pointedly, are you directing me? And he said, oh, no, it's up to you. It's your decision alone. We don't know if Gerald Butts was there. We don't know what precipitated that conversation, who asked for that conversation. There are still many things that I don't think anybody really fully has understood at this point.
For sure, there was a question period to the Prime Minister, and it was a very specific date, since June 21st, I think it was. How many times did Gerald Butts meet with Jody Wilson-Raybould? And his answer basically said, oh, we have cabinet every week type of thing.
No, and there were lots of meetings going on between ministers and my staff all the time. So we don't have an answer to that. More to the point, Iqra Khalid's put this motion forward. I noticed Gerald Butts' name isn't on there of people who to call, and he is the other person that has something at stake in all of what's been transpiring over the last 2 weeks.
Tiffany, Jim Harley asks on Facebook, could it be she feels free to speak to cabinet because Butts is no longer there? He was at all the meetings and MPs have spoken about that before. That's what Mr. Harley asks.
I think there are likely a lot of factors at play, but I believe this is one of a few times that entire group's been together as this has continued to break. So whether his presence or non-presence plays a role here, I would actually just say, from my perspective, this looks like an opportunity for her to have been able to speak with her cabinet colleagues while they were together and as this was unfolding.
But cabinet is not a group therapy session. It isn't like you go in and confess your sins.
Like it is rare that she would come talk to
again, I say this, and maybe Chris can recall, he's slightly older than I am or much, but I can't think of a previous government where, take, for example, in the Harper era, the first minister Harper lost was Michael Chong around the Quebec as a nation resolution. Michael Chong didn't ask to go to cabinet and speak to that, or I haven't known of a cabinet minister who's viewed that as being a successful way to move forward. And it creates, the Prime Minister says he's worried about precedent. What sort of precedent is he creating for himself if cabinet ministers former cabinet ministers are now allowed to come and speak to cabinets as they request based on whatever wrongdoings or not they have felt been granted to them? It's just bizarre.
This whole thing has been, just very quickly, been unprecedented. Remember, she put down a 2,000-word statement after she was shuffled from Justice to Veterans Affairs. I have never seen that, where someone who has been moved from one portfolio to another felt compelled, or for whatever reason, to state what you had accomplished and to talk about the things that you did while you were speaking truth to power, and suggesting that, there was something more to the decision to move her than simply we need to put the best person we have available into Veterans Affairs.
You almost wonder if Scott Bryson is next, asking if he can be forgiven, because according to the Prime Minister, he's responsible for all of this.
Let me ask Françoise. Karabi85 on YouTube asks, what are the chances of Ms. Wilson-Raybould either leaving the Liberal caucus or getting expelled, and what would be the consequences of that happening?
Expelled, I really see like slim to none, because that would really hurt the image of the government and of Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister. Leaving, I don't know.
She didn't sound like it today.
No, she did say a member of caucus. Have you noticed? Because the question was, are you still a member of caucus? She said, I'm a Liberal member of Parliament. And in this world, every word are so important.
Good point.
Anyway, that kind of got to me. So does she still want to run as a Liberal? Will she be accepted as a candidate for the Liberal Party? I think it's too early to say, because it depends what unfolds. She didn't blame anybody in particular. She wrote what she wrote in very sibilant words that nobody understand, and we can understand tons of things about it, but it doesn't accuse anybody in particular. So it depends how it unfolds. But the kick from the Prime Minister, no.
Okay, I've got to take another short commercial break, but our conversation will continue online on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Stay with us. We're back in a few seconds. And we are back during the commercial break. Patricia Corpin, Chris, asks on Facebook, why is the RCMP not involved in investigating this?
Well, first of all, they have to be, in some cases, they would have to be asked to get involved. There has to be an official complaint to the RCMP. That's not always the case. The other alternative would be if there is clear evidence that they are in possession of that would suggest that a law has been broken. There are all sorts of insinuations here, but if it's now just a question of pressure being applied to her to make some kind of decision around the prosecution, that doesn't necessarily suggest there was any attempt to obstruct justice or to interfere with it. But the short answer is I don't know why they haven't, they certainly haven't been asked. I don't know whether they have enough evidence at this point to make some inquiries or not.
Are we sure that they haven't, though, that they're not involved in any aspect? Somebody asked them, because you never know. The director...
someone did ask late last week.
Yeah, we've asked, but again, they don't confirm investigations.
Yeah, they won't.
So,
but we don't know for sure they aren't.
Because the director in charge of the SNC-Lavalin could decide, in view of what they're hearing, is there somebody who's playing with our file that could, because it could have an impact on the criminal file. Because don't think for 1 second that SNC-Lavalin, with the great and brilliant lawyers that they have, will not say, we have the government who might be into the fact that we go into the remedial aspect instead of the full court.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Both Jody Wilson-Raybould and Kathleen Roussel, who is the Director of Public Prosecutions, are officers of the court. If they believe there has been an attempt to break the law, they are compelled by their position as a member of the bar to actually report that themselves.
Well, and isn't that what the Prime Minister has been saying?
He has indicated that nobody told me. He
Yeah.
didn't say anything, but nobody's told the police. But nobody's told him, he said.
Yeah, he keeps saying Jody Wilson-Raybould had an obligation, if she felt that way,
Correct.
to say it
That's what
to
he's
him.
referring to.
Okay, I got to wrap again, but we'll be back, as I said, on the TV right after this. Welcome back to Power and Politics on CBC News Network. I'm Vashi Capellos, here with the Power panel, Chris Hall, Françoise Boivin, Tim Powers, and Tiffany Gooch. We are also live streaming on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and we want to thank you for all your questions. Keep them coming in. Tim, we've seen question period now. We've seen over the last hour some pretty big developments, including Jody Wilson-Raybould address cabinet. Where do you see this going? I guess I would say in the coming days, but maybe just for the rest of the day. Yeah.
Well, is somebody else going to fall, I guess. I think we're all looking to see, there does seem to be a point that we need to focus on, and that is, at some point, David Lametti is going to say to the Prime Minister, and Thomas Cromwell, Jody Wilson-Raybould's attorney, is going to say, you give direction on this. You have to believe, as François said, that's got to be sooner rather than later. Certainly on the government side, you would think they would want to have that happen sooner. That would seem to be a key element that is missing here, that is necessary to get this story moving forward. Perhaps out of caucus tomorrow, as Chris suggested earlier, if she feels, she being Jody Wilson-Raybould, that she's going to open up a little bit in there, information will come out. I'd be surprised if we didn't hear something about this cabinet discussion in reports later this evening, because God forbid things do leak from cabinet. But you look at what the opposition are going to continue to do what they do. They're just going to go after everything here. Why do they want a public inquiry? Because they know the political value of Gomery if you're not subject to all of this. I don't think that's going to happen by any stretch of the imagination, but more noise, no clarity, no solution appears to be on the horizon at the moment.
Tiffany, what are you watching for?
So I think ultimately this isn't one on what the details of the actual case are, and I think that from a public perspective, many won't understand what's actually taking place, but are able to take in what they're feeling as they're seeing it. And I think that this is going to be a difficult stretch for the Liberals for two reasons. The first being that the press and the discourse around it, and especially with the opposition pushing and trying to find further ways to politicize, will be able to start to creep into the public as they start to make decisions about the election in the fall. And so how this sort of rolls in this next few days will start to give us that sense. And I think the next piece too is actually the change in PMO. It's a large change to take place. Something like that would actually be quite difficult no matter who the person was or the role that they played on the team going into an election year. And so I think, as we saw in question period today, a lot of rhetoric around the role that he played and who he was. And I think we'll now have to start to see what type of leaders step up and what kind of staffing plan the Prime Minister brings forward to also give confidence to all of those who may have had files that were stick-handled by Butts and want to ensure that business carries forward in the coming months as well.
I just have a little over a minute left. Françoise?
Very quickly, what I'm looking forward is who's going to replace Gerald Butts. Who's going to take the lead. It might be the biggest move that we haven't seen. It's not for Jerry Butts' sake. It's to be able to maybe stop the way they've been acting in the last week, 2 weeks, and restart. And if I was them, if I was advising the Liberal, I would say to them, please waive that so-called client attorney privilege. Let her speak and argue. And go face on. If you claim you haven't done nothing, is it words? What words were really used? And maybe that's the start of that strategy with the Justice Committee changing their tone on the Liberal bench. And it might be better that way. And with Butts at the helm, they wouldn't be able to do it because credibility would be zero, because that would be, again, another change of strategy. But with another person in PMO in charge, being the principal counselor, it might be the Prime Minister getting up and saying, I had good advice from my new friend, and we're waving. Let her speak and see what she has to say.
Look for caucus. I don't think there's unanimity in caucus about her continued presence as a member of the Liberal caucus, not just as a Liberal MP. There's got to be some concern about defending the Liberal brand, because this is now becoming an issue about, are they trustworthy? Are there special favors being given to SNC-Lavalin, not available to other companies? We heard that today in the House of Commons during the debate over the NDP motion. And lastly, Jody Wilson-Raybould has played his hand by a lot of people's measure better than the government has. And sure enough, Jerry Butts resigns last night, trying to change the narrative, to deflect attention away from the government to himself, and she puts it right back on the government by going to cabinet today.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That's a wrap on this early edition of Power and Politics. Thanks to this Power panel, Chris Hall, Tiffany Gooch, Tim Powers, and Françoise Boivin. Of course, we will be back at 5 o'clock Eastern for more on the SNC-Lavalin controversy. To recap, the Prime Minister's Principal Secretary, Jerry Butts, has resigned, and Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former Justice Minister, has addressed Cabinet. We will have lots more on this coming up on CBC News Network. Stay with us.